good morning, and welcome everyone. Happy Saturday morning to you all. Early Saturday morning. We're gonna let folks join and then we'll get started. And of course, this is a long day of programs, so we are happy for those of you who have joined us early. Hopefully you'll stay the entire day, and if not, we totally understand. We'll have programming going on all throughout the day. I'm Sabria Hassan, for those of you who don't know. I'm the Director of Programs here at the Banneker-Douglass Museum. Good morning, Natalie. Good morning. So we'll take about a minute or so more, and then we'll jump right in. Good morning, Gina. Gina Lewis is one of our anti-racism coalition members who helps make all of this happen. So we're so excited. We have 3 topics that we'll be discussing today. So we're going to get started fairly shortly and then just get this day going. Good morning, Miriam from the Naval Academy, our ally and buddy over there at the Naval Academy. Good morning. Thank you for being here. And yes, please feel free to use the chat to engage with others. Also, we'll be using the question and answer feature. I know some of our presenters will be asking questions, allowing for that dialogue throughout the presentation. Other presenters will more than likely wait until the end of the presentation, but please feel free to use the question and answer feature for any questions that you would like to, park, and then we'll address them towards the end of the program. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, and I'm sure that we'll have people coming in and jumping out as the day goes on. So again, I am Sabria Hassan. I am the Director of Programs here at the Banneker-Douglass Museum, your state's museum on African American history and culture. And I would just like to point out that today is my first day coming to you live from the museum since March of 2020. I know some of you have joined many of our virtual programs where I broadcasted live from my bedroom most of the time. But today I'm here in the museum. So although I'm excited, it's a little weird as I try to get my lighting together and everything situated. So please bear with me. And again, thank you for being here today. So I won't keep you long, with comments from me. You'll see me all day and we'll be able to dialogue. And then of course, at the end of this program, if you haven't attended a previous anti-racism training, we'll actually share a link after our last program, which is on reparations. That link will allow you to join a Zoom meeting platform where we'll be able to have a more informal discussion about everything that you've learned today. So that link will be available later on in the day, and feel free to join, or not join. I know during our last program, we really were able to unpack a lot of information in a really laid back, informal setting. So again, feel free to join. And that session, I think, will begin at, I think it begins at 2:30 or so. But if you come to the last reparations session, which begins at 1:15, that link will be shared then. So I will now turn the floor over to our mighty Director Compton, Chanel Compton, who will share some thoughts with you. Director Compton.
Thank you, Ms. Hassan. And welcome back to the Banneker-Douglass Museum, Ms. Hassan. It's so good to have you back. I do miss your background home wall decals that were really awesome in all of our programs, but it's so good to have you back. And welcome everyone. I'm sad that I can't see your faces today, but so happy that you were able to join us for the last of our 2021 series for the anti-racism trainings. A little bit about the Banneker-Douglass Museum. We were established in 1984. Like Director Hassan had mentioned, we are your state museum on African-American history and culture. We dedicate ourselves to authentically preserving and presenting African-American heritage in the great state of Maryland, but we're also a hub for social change. We do that through our programming, our exhibitions, and trainings such as this one, using Black history as a framework to inspire you all to be greater agents of change in your communities. Since 2020, during the global pandemic and new resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, BDM launched an anti-racism coalition and community training series. Since March 2020, our museum has presented online educational programs that has engaged over 50,000 people through our youth conference, anti-racism training, symposiums, Governor Black History Award celebration, public artwork, and more. Though we are a state agency, it's contributions that make possible the hiring of much needed staff, our youth and community programs and exhibitions. You can support the work of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture that operates the museum, as well as the Banneker-Douglass Museum, by making a contribution at any size by going to bdmuseum.maryland.gov/donate. I would like to give a special thank you to our donors and grantors that made today's program possible. The City of Annapolis, the Banneker-Douglass Museum Foundation, the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, and the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives, as well as the Governor's coordinating offices. I would also give a special thank you to the mighty, incredible the Banneker-Douglass Museum and the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture's Anti-Racism Coalition. You all are tremendous and do phenomenal work. I would definitely like to recognize elected officials in the room that are also leaders of social change and commissioners and the BDM staff. I'd like to recognize Speaker Adrienne Jones, Dr. Trina Coleman, Dr. David Fakunle, Inimini Ekong, and it is without further ado that I would like to recognize and introduce my personal Shiro, and many of you all know her. She is the chair of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, Reverend Dr. Tamara E. Wilson.
An incredible
Everyone, please give
thank
me a
the
second as
commission's
I
dedicated
figure out the
programs
sound.
and the
I'm sorry.
Banneker-Douglass
When she was elected, greetings and welcome to the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture's third annual symposium. For over 50 years, the Commission has been committed to promoting Maryland's African American heritage through such programs and initiatives as today's symposium. This year's theme, the spirit of the Black family, reclaim, rejoice, renew, and remember, is sure to inspire you to use your voice to make positive change, not just for the future, but for right now, today. As the first state ethnic commission in the nation, we serve as a national model for the preservation of African American heritage. And while we are the only African American commission that operates a museum and oversees a capital grants program, we hope that we will not be the last. As the chair of this historic and incredible commission, I thank the commission's dedicated programs committee and the Banneker-Douglass Museum staff for producing this year's symposium. And a very special thank you to all of our sponsors whose financial support made it all possible. It is now my honor to introduce the Honorable Speaker of the House, Adrienne A. Jones. When she was elected unanimously by the House of Delegates on May 1st, 2019, to serve as the Speaker of the Maryland House of Delegates, Speaker Jones became the first African American and the first woman ever to hold that position in its 242-year history. Speaker Jones' commitment to social justice was immediately felt when she developed the nation's first true comprehensive statewide policy agenda for racial justice and economic progress. She also put an end to the 15-year lawsuit around program duplication and provided record funding to Maryland's HBCUs. Speaker Jones also removed the divisive Maryland Remembers plaque from the State House and repealed the state song that paid tribute to the Confederacy. She is a Maryland history maker. Ladies and gentlemen, Speaker of the House, Madam Adrienne A. Jones.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. It's a pleasure to join the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, as well as the Banneker-Douglass Museum, to bring greetings at today's morning anti-racism seminar. I want to thank the Commission Chair, Dr. Wilson, for her kind invitation, all that she does, and Chanel Compton for this invitation. Excuse me. You are providing open and thoughtful conversations on these very difficult topics of structural racism and equity. This seminar is entitled Anti-Racism. So what is anti-racism? Anti-racism encompasses a range of ideas and political actions which are meant to counter racial prejudice, systemic racism, and the oppression of specific racial groups. Anti-racism is usually structured around conscious efforts and deliberate actions which are intended to provide equal opportunities for all people on both an individual and a systemic level. As a philosophy, it can be engaged in by the acknowledgement of personal privileges, confronting acts as well as systems of racial discrimination and or working to change personal racial biases. As all of us are aware, historically, government has been, to be frank, hostile to Black people and our way of life. From redlining to policing to healthcare, there have been policies in place designed to systematically disenfranchise our communities, and they have had residual lasting effects. Regardless of that fact, American culture is rooted in Black culture, food, music, art, you name it. Simply put, Black culture is American culture. That is why over 25 years ago, I started the Baltimore County African American Cultural Festival that celebrates our rich history and culture and is a critical part of an anti-racist agenda. But we can't stop there. As leaders in our communities and in government, we have to do more to reverse racist policies and advance equity. In the 2021 legislative session, we made anti-racism and anti-bias a priority. We passed bills requiring bias training for police officers and for healthcare practitioners. We're making corporate boards in Maryland more diverse, and we're giving minority-owned businesses better opportunities to get state contracts. Of the 106 speakers before me, I was the first to create a Black agenda. This first ever statewide policy agenda will help advance economic opportunities and equity in Black communities across the state. This goes to show that when you have diversity in government and elect people who look like the communities they serve, we can make more meaningful actions to correct existing injustice that has gone on for far too long. I'm proud to have a state commission dedicated to recognizing and uplifting Maryland's rich African-American history, which can influence and move us further towards diversity and inclusion. If we're going to heal from the past, progress and move forward as a country, we have to start with these conversations. Thank you again to the commission for hosting this seminar, and thanks to everyone participating. You're laying the groundwork for a more equitable and inclusive state. Have a great event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Speaker Jones. We really appreciate and are humbled to have you here, recognizing the work that the Commission and the Banneker-Douglass Museum are doing. So thank you again. And I just want to say that I, as the Director of Programs, am so honored to be amongst such dynamic Black women as Director Chanel Compton, Chair Wilson, and of course, Speaker of the House, Adrienne Jones. So thank you all for allowing me to be here and learn from you. And we'll keep the ball rolling, and I will now introduce our first speaker, presenter, another very dynamic Black woman. When we first formed our coalition, we really wanted to look at topics. As a coalition, we came up with topics that we felt really resonated in our communities, and topics that we really needed to talk about, not only amongst ourselves, but with the community at large. And these topics, how we presented them, weren't presented in any particular order. They just happened to roll out this way. So now as we come here for our last training session of the year, and I know we've been saying the last training session or the last, but this is not the last. This is just the beginning when it comes to our anti-racism work and the coalition. But the digital divide and technology was something that really stood out to us, especially during, as we were in the midst of the pandemic, and we were thinking about the young people, you know, in terms of their lack of access to technology, those teachers who now had to take their teaching to a digital platform, and just the divide that we know exists when it comes to jobs and other type of tech access. So We were so happy to, as a museum and commission, to be able to connect with Dr. Trina Coleman, who is here today. And I'll just briefly share, Dr. Coleman is the CEO and president of Coleman Comprehensive Solutions. She's a scientist, an educator, entrepreneur, host of Beyond the Classroom with Dr. Trina Coleman on HBCU iRadio and HBCU Smart TV, and a public speaker. She's only the second of 5 African-American women in the nation's history. Again, let me back up. In the nation's history to obtain a degree in theoretical nuclear physics. So when we bring people here to share with you all, we get the real deal. So she's a scholar and a former academic and administrator, and she's crafted a diverse professional portfolio over a 25-year span. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Trina Coleman.
Well, thank you for that amazing introduction, and I am so happy to be here. Can everyone hear me?
You sound
Yes.
great.
Okay, great. Thank you, and I also would like to thank the attendees and the organizers, and of course the speaker of the House. That was an amazing introduction that she did, and a lot of the points she made are going to touch on some of the things I'm going to speak on this morning. But I think that this panel is necessary. These conversations are necessary, not just for today, but to keep them moving forward. And I'm going to share my screen now, and I put together some slides. And one thing that I'd like to say is I am an educator, so I like people to engage with me while I'm talking. So if you have a question, please put it in the box, and someone will prompt me that there's a question in the Q&A box, and I will stop and we'll talk about whatever it is that I'm talking about that you want to have a question about. So let's get started. All right, let me get my presentation. Can you all see the presentation?
Yep, it looks great.
All right. Let's get it going. Okay, I chose my title, How America's Social Contract Engineered the STEM Gap for African Americans. So we're going to talk about race, we're going to talk about technology, but more importantly, we can't talk about technology without talking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And as time has progressed, the things that and the systems that were put in place many years ago still impact us today. And so I'm going to get right into it and talk about what a social contract is. And this is a definition that is in Merriam-Webster dictionary: an actual or hypothetical, which I underlined for a reason, agreement among the members of an organized society or between a community and its ruler that defines and limits the rights and duties of each. Now, let's unpack that right there. Hypothetical, first of all, I'm like, yeah, that's probably what we have, but we also have some actual stuff that is built into policy. But the agreement, the word agreement means that both sides are going along with whatever is going on, which is not the case. The members of an organized society, technically, I guess we are, or community and its ruler, which was an interesting term, that defines and limits the rights and duties of each. Limits the rights. That's our part right there. Our rights are limited. We have things that we should be able to do, but this infrastructure of this social contract was made so precise to make sure that there were things we could not do, which are now snowballing into other things. And we're trying to roll that stuff back, which we must. So I'm gonna move on. Any questions right here? Because the social contract is the basis for everything that impacts us daily. Redlining was mentioned by the speaker. And here's what it is. If you're not clear on what redlining is, it was actually started by banks who made it virtually impossible for Black folks to get loans on homes in certain neighborhoods. So it's the illegal practice right now of refusing to offer credit or insurance in particular communities. And I have on the next slide a map of Baltimore. This is Baltimore as it is redlined. And you can see there's a big old cluster of red near the center of the city. And then there's an outlying neighborhood or two over on the right side and a couple up on the northern part. But if you look at the legend about what these different colors mean, and yes, I'm going to tie all this to technology. Red is hazardous. It sounds like a chemical spill or something, but red is the neighborhoods that were considered hazardous, which were the ones relegated for Black folks to live. Then they go up a little bit. Declining was yellow, blue still desirable, and green best. Now, if you guys live in Baltimore or near Baltimore, you know the city a little bit better than I do. But that big cluster of red, where the bulk of those neighborhoods have a large percentage of Black folks or people of color. They have the worst infrastructure, and infrastructure is everything from schools to broadband to just basic public services. So the green gets the best of all of that, policing, all of those things. And once again, I am going to tie this back to technology because I did mention broadband and schools. Broadband and schools are the foundation today for our students and our later learners to get their best education. So this is Baltimore as it was redlined then and as it is redlined now. So the digital divide, this slide right here, I see a question that's popped up. The digital divide, I made this graphic myself based on information that I got from the American Community Survey, which is put out by the Census Bureau. So looking at the one I circled, which was Black folks, if you look at each of the colored bars, the first one is who has a laptop or a desktop in their home and a handheld device, which can be a tablet or a telephone, a smartphone rather, and internet service at home. In that little blue bubble, I put 49.3%, which is the number of African-American homes that have one of everything. That's less than half of them. Less than half of our people have homes where they can have a laptop computer, a smartphone and internet service. I said, well, wow. So moving to the green. There's no laptop or desktop in the home. I cannot see the right side of my screen because of where the gallery is. But there's no laptop or desktop, and they have internet service. But 7% of the homes are in that category. 7.2% of them have a laptop or desktop, but they don't have an iPad or a tablet, but they do have internet service. So we have 7.2% of our homes that have a computer and the internet. And then 36.4% don't have anything. They have no computer, they have no internet. So most of those are likely the rural homes or the extremely impoverished homes of Black people in the United States. And if you go over to the Asian one, you see 80% of the homes that are run by Asians or Asian Americans have one of everything versus our less than 50%. Hispanic homes have more technology in them than our Black folks. White have more technology in them than our Black folks. So we are at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes down to having technological resources in our homes. And the number that is still staggering to me, that over a third don't have any type of technology in the home. I am going to navigate to the next slide. So the racial divide. Some of the states are Black, some of the states are white. I did that on purpose. The Black states are ones, I think I got them all, that have HBCUs in them. And all of this ties back to that social contract of this country, which after emancipation, or right before emancipation, conversations were had about what to do with Black people when slavery was abolished. And everyone was supposed to be able to attend all the land grant universities, regardless of color or race. It didn't work out like that. So we have a lot of land grant universities and colleges that are specifically HBCUs based on the definition of what an HBCU is: college or university or institution of higher learning created before 1964, specifically to educate Black Americans. So that's what an HBCU is. And this is where our racial divide comes into play. And it also speaks to our broadband and our digital divide, because those things tend to impact our redline neighborhoods, which tend to impact Black folks. Public schools, which we have had separate but equal up until allegedly 1954, which stretched out a little bit longer than that. But the public schools for our students are in those districts, which means they have fewer resources. Higher education, which I spoke on, are HBCUs located in those areas where we have the red line, and the areas where white folks thought it was acceptable to put our schools. So they were like, put it right here, put it in Tuskegee, put it in Elizabeth City, or wherever those schools were put. And so we have that racial divide. Professional development is another area where we have racial divide. And that comes about because if we're not getting access to technological internships or being hired to do jobs that are high-tech jobs, even if educated to do those things, professional development is a barrier or an obstacle if there is no access to those types of jobs or opportunities for our students and our career demographics. Now, I'm going to bring this thing full circle. So the social contract was put in place, and we didn't get to vote on whether we wanted the terms of this social contract or not. So the social contract pretty much said this is how it's going to go, and we had to work around that. So then discrimination is a result of said social contract. So discrimination then limits African Americans to what they can and cannot do based on the power structure that is in place. Okay, so as a result of that, we have this unequal infrastructure problem. So the unequal infrastructure makes it more difficult for us to learn, to teach, to experience, to have role models. And at least if we have role models, to have access to those role models within the confines of these red line districts, which goes next to number 4, which is our education and our educational institutions. The unequal infrastructure spills over into that, as we saw and are still seeing a little bit of as a result of COVID. I have been an adjunct since the pandemic started at Bowie State and at Virginia Union University. And I can speak directly to the disparities that some of my students are having right now: bandwidth, the lack of resources as a matter of generational wealth or lack thereof, as our people have traditionally experienced, where they are, living at home with multiple generations of family. They are living in small housing unit where they don't have adequate space to have a place to go and do their classes without having interruptions. I had a student doing a presentation last week, and she had her baby with her, and her baby was crying the entire time of her presentation, but I was impressed with the fact that she pressed through it without a hitch. And I'm like, yes, she has goals. She's going to get there. And regardless of what the challenges are, and that's what we have had to do historically. But education is also an obstacle in certain places where our students aren't getting the type of training that they need. And this is going to go towards talking about the technical opportunities and jobs in those STEM areas. So being able to get the superior type of training and learning, having access to a calculus class or a physics class in high school, for example, is not something that is given across the board. Back to Maryland. Maryland school systems in 2020, they incorporated a pretty radical approach to STEM and education for their students. They reconfigured their curriculum so that it was included that their students, before graduating from high school, would take physics, would take chemistry, would take biology, and get those types of classes under their belt, get exposure to them prior to going off and attending college and not being ready to take those advanced courses if they were going to major in computer science or physical science or any of those types of fields that require them to have that extra level of proficiency in mathematics and science. So opportunity comes when you're in the right place at the right time and you know the right people for most part. So having the opportunity to engage with mentors, with scholars, experts in the field, subject matter experts, to learn how to become one of those people is something that we are short of in our communities as well. And it goes back to the full hexagon, as I call it. The social contract, once again, impacts all of these things. Right now, we are in a place where there's a level of, I'll say remorse. I won't call it guilt, but we're getting more input and resources from places that historically we have not been getting resources for our students, our universities, and things like that, to try to help bolster up our ability to be successful in these technological fields. Opportunities are being opened up for us that could have been before, but we are still not getting there. We're in a better place, but making sure that we can sustain that on our own without relying on the fact that we may be getting some sort of assistance from non-traditional sources. And number 6, the STEM disparity. So that disparity is a result, as I just stated, of not having the right types of classes for our students to prepare them for these high-tech jobs that are fastly replacing the traditional jobs of assembly line worker or something like that, because robotics is now in play. artificial intelligence is now in play, machine learning, and having to do things more computer based as opposed to manual. And that is going to now bring us to this conundrum of, okay, how do we close this gap based on the title of my presentation, where the social contract has engineered the gap. It was deliberate, and it made sure that any or as many benefits that were or could have been available to Black folks were, I'll say, shielded or hindered them from obtaining them. And we see this happening right now with the Voting Rights Acts and things like that. It's a very deliberate process whereby to make sure the social contract benefits those that created the social contract. So this was a lesson in me schooling and bringing context to the world I know, which is technology. And I'll go back and I'll share a brief story with you guys. Yes, I am the second African-American woman to receive a degree in my field, a PhD in my field. But I will say this as well. I have never worked one day as a theoretical nuclear physicist, because it is a field that is very, very exclusive and very much dominated by white men. I have been told that there was no place for me in more than one research group. So having said all that, I had to take my skill set and make it do something else. And I'm able to make it do many things. But the social contract and the discriminatory practices kept me from realizing the potential to do that particular thing. I have used it and done research in other things, but that STEM disparity comes all the way around, even back to me. And I did it all right. And, you know, educating our people, which was what was in my heart when I started thinking about what I was going to talk about. Educating our people was very important to me, because if you're not in the field, you may not understand completely what all it takes, first of all, to be ready to be a professional in one of these fields, but you also may not appreciate the barriers. And our barriers in this country are so much against us that there are visas that are given to Asians so that they can come over here to do these jobs that require a level of expertise in a technical area that we are capable and have degrees in. And so that social contract is just, okay, we don't want you in these jobs. You're not smart, which goes back to how we were treated during slavery and how white folks have looked at us. You're not smarter than we are. You don't have the capability to do this or that. So let's go and outsource these jobs to some that we think are capable of doing these jobs, but it's not for y'all. So how do we fix this thing? What do we do? Policy. What types of policies can we champion, or I have champions as well, but what types of policies are needed to ensure that we get our fair share of opportunities and that discriminatory practices are done away with? We haven't figured that part out yet. So I don't know what we can do. I know we can do something, and I know there are people working on it, but I know policy is definitely something that will help make change in this race and technology conundrum. The school systems, charters versus publics, urban versus rural, one-to-one, how many devices are given to students to use at home versus use in the classroom? Are there enough devices to use at home versus in the classrooms? What types of curriculum are being developed? Are the Common Core and the standards of learning as we have here in Virginia, are those things working? Is that the way we should be moving forward? I know that in Los Angeles County, the unified school system, their African-American males in 5th grade, for example, less than like 8% of them pass math proficiency. It's a single digit number. That is not acceptable at all. And so our school systems need to be looked at, and we need to figure out a way to provide the right opportunities and the right motivation for our students to be interested in moving forward in learning more about math and science, not just exposing them to a 1 or 2 week summer camp or something like that. Unicorns, my sweet spot. Unicorns are those students that are the brightest and the best with the worst case scenario. They're out there. They're in those red line districts with single parent homes, or the parent not at home, or the school system has no resources to help them cultivate their curiosity and to help them grow their intellect. Those unicorns need people like us to say, okay, let's figure out a way to help develop that child so that child can get the right types of opportunities and get in front of the right people that can help him or her move forward in their academic career, which will get them to the place where they are moving forward as professionals. Champions, I just spoke about champions. Those are the people that are in a position to say, yes, I can make this happen, and take on some of these things, be it policy, be it making changes in the school system, be it taking on unicorns and exposing them to the right opportunities, and even paying for them to go to college, as some of our philanthropists have been doing, wiping away student debt and things like that. Champions are needed to help push forward into making this social contract more equitable for us, or creating our own new social contract, which I am in favor of. So technology, let me go into my STEM hat now for a minute. Technology, and I came up with this one at like 3 o'clock this morning. It is the byproduct of imagination along with access to science, engineering, mathematics, and opportunity. Technology is a thing. And when I'm teaching like my STEM camps or something, and we go over STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, a lot of people equate technology with coding or computers or things like that. And I break it down very, very simply. Technology is to make something new or to make something better. So if you think about it, smartphones, for example, they weren't so skinny back when they were first invented. They weren't so lightweight. They didn't do as many things. So each iteration of somebody's phone, be it an iPhone or a Samsung or other type of phone, is to make it a little bit better or to make it different in some way so that it is better than the previous version. So imagination, we have plenty of that. All of us, those unicorns are thinking about things that we haven't thought about or anybody hasn't thought about, but they need access to science, engineering, math, and opportunity. So here we are with race and technology. Let's talk about anti-racism. How do we get to that point? Once again, we have to champion them. We have to figure out how to get around the barricades and the barriers that have been placed there intentionally. So as a result of doing all that and getting past all those things, we get what? We get more doctors, we get more engineers, we get more scientists, which equals more representation. Diversity, equity, and inclusion mean nothing if we don't have adequate numbers of professionals to fill those positions. If we don't have an adequate number of professionals to create new scenarios to help create more doctors and more engineers and more scientists after them, which takes representation and grows it, similar to generational wealth. We're going to grow generational professionals. And thank you. And I'm ready to take some questions from you guys. Here is all of my contact information. And I want to talk. I'm tired. I don't like listening to myself so much. I want to hear what you guys think, and we can talk about a dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Coleman. And I am going to come on video just as soon as I get my
You want to stop share?
here. No, yes, if you could stop share, but as you're doing that, I can ask you a first question that came from John Kerner, and he asks, didn't the federal government play a significant role in supporting redlining?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The federal government had to play a role in it because banks are backed by the federal government. So they had to go along with it. They also, infrastructure wise, as I stated, there's policies and procedures and conduits like Verizon, for example. They own the bulk of the conduits in the ground that carry fiber optics and things like that. So if they want to go around the red line neighborhoods, they get permits and they just go around them. And that's the federal government playing. And again, the FCC is still playing a role in that because of the way that the telecommunication companies are allowed to report certain things and check a box off. For example, a census tract in a red line community, or in any community for that point, but specifically ours, if one house in that census tract has access to internet, they can say the whole census tract has internet capability, true or false. They can say it based on that one particular residence. So it's a lot of those types of shenanigans that, you know, perpetuate the fact that we are in situations that make it more difficult for us to succeed.
Thank you so much for that. And we have a question. And then I also want to say that you'll see, our attendees will see if they stay for the next program or the next presentation, that this idea of redlining, you know, it runs across topics because,
Yes.
of course, our housing presenter is going to talk about redlining in significance as well. So we will see that theme of redlining reoccurring throughout the day. So I have a question from Tony Scott, who asks, what's your framework for a new social contract?
Whoa.
I thought that one was kind of heavy. It was short, but I was like, I think that's kind of heavy.
Well, I think it warrants discussion. I don't
Of
want to be the
course.
only one to weigh in on that because I'm not, I mean, you know, it's something that I think is critical because that's how we got to where we are. But I don't think that it's a one-person conversation. I think it's a think tank type conversation. How do we reinvent ourselves as a people? Because part of recreating or coming up with a framework for a social contract touches on, as I think about Brown versus Board, for example. We pushed for Brown versus Board of Education, but is it still serving us? Has it ever served us well? It did serve us well for a little while, but is it serving us well right now? Social contract means we have to come together and agree how we're going to interact with each other as a people, as well as how we interface with the rest of the world or the country or whoever's in our circle, so to speak, as far as community is concerned. Part of the other part of the social contract is family. What's going to be our standard? How are we going to survive? How are we going to work together as families, both nuclear and community? Because I know back in the day, family was community. You got other people had permission to beat your tail if you were doing something wrong. So looking at how we do what we do as a people is part of that framework. Education. I am loving the fact that more of our students are coming to our HBCUs now, which is, where why I touched on that Brown versus Board issue. But they're coming back or coming because of, many different reasons. One of them, I'm sad to say, is likely because they saw an input of resources coming from outside of our community. So I guess that made it okay for them to come to HBCUs because other people were investing in us besides ourselves. So our social contract amongst us also needs to be more of an uplifting, championing of ourselves, as I stated earlier regarding the educational infrastructure and all those things that were that are obstacles for our students. So I would like to hear from the person that asked the question, what type of feedback he would give to that question, or anybody else who wants to chime in.
So Tony Scott, if you're out there, please feel free to share that with us in the chat. And I will say, I appreciate how you took it back to the family, because of course the theme that we've been touching on all year is the Black family, and how many of the things that we talk about, all of these topics typically come back to the Black family. So when you're talking about the recreation of the social contract, you can't talk about that without talking about the family. And I'll also say too, as we engage in this idea of the social contract, and we hear about housing, and then at the end of the day, reparations, there also again will be that area for us to come and discuss on an informal platform what that looks like. Because I think actually as a director of programs, I'm getting like an idea for a program in my head of, us coming together and talking about what that recreation of a social contract would look like. So I appreciate that question, Tony Scott, and I appreciate your feedback. And yes, if you have any, if you want to enter any more feedback, please feel free to put it in the chat. And then I have something from Leonard Gore, who has been interacting a lot, and I thank you for that. I'll ask this first question. He said, are there any research efforts that consider the advent of 5G as related to the digital divide? I understand that 5G is very expensive to build within the US, requires a highly trained workforce, which we do not have, and lack of coverage is lacking in white communities as well. 5G is what I understand will fuel the US smart technology economy.
Yes, that is true. I was hand selected to participate with NSF on the broadband research workshop, and it's been almost a year ago. And what the workshop was created to do was to come up with ideas. It was a 3-week process to talk about ways that we can overcome adoption issues, the rural lack of access, urban lack of access, the subsidy programs and all of that. So 5G is going to revolutionize the way that we can, for example, use artificial intelligence on a more daily basis. For example, if you want to think back to when we had our old school phones, if you're old enough to remember the flip phone and all that, we didn't have all those apps and things on them. So we didn't need as much bandwidth. We couldn't watch TV on our phones and movies. So now we can. The 5G network will allow us to have smarter phones and have smarter homes and things like that, where our bandwidth is more robust, it's faster, and it is expensive, but it's not as expensive as the telecom companies want you to believe, because they want to maximize their profits. So the areas that are lacking broadband now are lacking because the numbers don't add up for them. So if you have a rural place, if you have a 100-acre farm and you're the only one living on that farm, it's just one customer, as opposed to that 100 acres being a subdivision. So telecommunications, lobbying, politics, all of that is all it works together. This is a problem that could have been solved, just like clean energy. There's always been the technological know-how and capability to make cleaner energy, but it did not serve the purposes of big oil, and natural gas. So we're not doing that. we're talking about doing it a little bit more, but 5G is that game changer that the game will change for some, but not many. And that's the other thing. We don't want those red lines, those areas, those people to be able to take advantage of knowledge and information as readily as we want others to. It's all tied together. That's why, I mean, it's such an intricate quilt of, I can't use the word I want to use, but cluster is the first part. Y'all fill in the blank. So yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can fill in the blank. Somebody say yes, haha. I love what Alini Tedesi said. Reconstructing family and empowering young girls and boys to see their future 10 and 20 years in advance. So I think that goes back to the idea of the social contract and what that looks like. And I think that, I mean, that's powerful, although it's a very short, that's extremely powerful. When you look at our young people and how they move currently, I always say, I wonder if they're thinking about their future, because a lot of them move like they're not necessarily, thinking about if they even have a future or not. So really being able to get them to envision what the future looks like, I think that's really powerful.
I agree. And one of the reasons why they don't or they can't is because of the constructs in place that lead them to believe that they only have a limited number of things that they can do, or that they should do, athletics or entertainment or hair. And I mean, and I've talked to students who think that they are, and they don't want to go to college, or they don't think they can go to college. I work with an upper bound program. Girl was bright. She was smart. She was fast. She was not motivated, and she was not happy. I said, where are you going to school? You applied for school yet? No, I'm just going to go to cosmetology school. I'm like, are you for real? That girl could be she was a perfect candidate. But my point is, they're likely not thinking about their futures 10 years in advance. And if they are, they're thinking that they're going to be one thing, and they may not be that thing. 10 years, when I was 10 or 11, I thought I was going to be an archaeologist. And so, that was what I wanted to be. It was in the right field as far as STEM, but they aren't, and they don't have great role models at home because of the family structure breaking down. Make them do their homework, go to functions, sign them up for camps, those types of things, which will help to have them be exposed to more topics as opposed to just outside playing basketball or whatever. And yes, I'm generalizing, but doing something different.
And that actually, there was a comment, and it said, as important, and I want you to speak to this. So it says, as important as STEM is, it is equally important for students to learn trades that are related to STEM, but may not appear so. So for example, plumbing, electricians, building, etc. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes, I can. I've heard students also say, why do I need to learn algebra, or why do I need to learn the Pythagorean theorem? Because if you're going to do construction, for example, even, you have to know math. People that use their hands know math. Plumbers, for example, they know math. They have to know the difference between a 5/8 diameter pipe versus a 1.5 inch diameter pipe, and all of that, and water flow and pressure and things like that. So there is mathematics involved in plumbing, in laying carpet, in brick laying. You have to calculate how much material you need to do certain things. So STEM is involved in a whole lot of non-traditional, well, fields that are not thought of as traditional STEM fields. So that's where that math component actually comes into play. Just getting by isn't enough, regardless of what you're trying to do, be it a laborer type or not. Even in art, as my good friend Gina Marie Lewis is on, and I've watched her do math when she was doing, an artistic piece. So it's there in almost everything that people do.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll also say, with this being the opening program for the Commission's third annual symposium, on Wednesday, we'll have Nina Lattimore, she's a principal out of Prince George's County, Maryland, and she's going to speak more specifically to young people and the digital divide as well. So folks should feel free to join us on Wednesday as well. Did we have any more questions from the audience?
Come on, audience.
We have about 5 more minutes before we wrap up with Dr. Coleman. Dr. Coleman, we did get the question of, would you be willing to share your presentation? So we typically send out a resource packet that I, shared with you. So if you're interested in, sharing your presentation or abbreviated form of your presentation, it looks like the audience would really appreciate that.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, what I will do is I'll actually do the voiceover part. So it'll be a video as opposed to just the naked slides. So
I'll look at that. Look at you being all tech savvy.
I have a show, so I can use it for my class as well. So I have many different reasons why I can just make the video and it'll be useful for those.
That would be great. And so, like I said, what we do is usually a day or so after, and being that you're going to do a special edited version, we may send that out as a separate email, or depending on how long it takes, we'll include it in the resource packet. But all of our audience members receive they'll receive the presentations. And then we also provide them with any other resources, so books or media pertaining to the topic. So that answers the questions that, I know a lot of people are typically anxious as they're going through trying to jot down information, but that information will be available to you all, and you'll have a special presentation from Dr. Coleman. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So Dr. Coleman, and it looks like we're getting some well wishes from folks thanking you. Did you have any final words for the audience as we wrap up?
I do. First of all, I want to thank you for helping to facilitate, have me participate in this endeavor this morning. And I thank the audience for diligently listening to me. And hopefully there were some takeaways, and I said something that you may not have known and sparked some level of thought about it. And I look forward to listening to some of the other presenters. And thank you once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, of course. No, I enjoy facilitating. I learned so much from people like Dr. Coleman. And like I said, being able to, you know, rub shoulders with dynamic Black women. And I just love it. I was actually, while you were presenting, I was texting to a friend. I said, I'm sitting here with the nation's second.
Quick fact about that, though. The first one was Dr. Shirley Jackson. She got her PhD when I was in second grade. So
Wow.
between my second grade year and the time I graduated, there were none.
Wow. And you know, I was thinking, I was like, well, who was the first? But there you
Shirley
go.
Jackson, she's the president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and she's the highest paid president in the country. Go, go
Oh.
Dr. Jackson. Yes.
Go Dr. Jackson. Yes. I
Yes.
love it. Well,
Mhm.
very good.
Yep.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
again, Dr. Coleman, for being here. And we will get started with Mr. Eeny Meeny Ekong in about 2 minutes. So thank you so much.
Bye.
Hello, Mr. Ekong.
Happy Saturday. How
Hi.
are you?
I am well. I'm just going to start by saying I'm really jealous of your background because I know, first of all, it looks great. And I know when we were practicing, I was practicing from home and I was like all happy. And now I was telling the audience, this is my first time being in the museum doing a virtual program since we started the virtual programs. So I'm getting like used to like my backgrounds and my settings and everything. And yours is looking like spectacular, but we practiced. I have the audience know we did practice with you to get you to this point, but it looks great. You look stellar. So
thank you. I greatly appreciate. And I'm gonna wait until we start, but I want to give thanks to Dr. Trina Coleman for what I did get to slide in. That was good stuff. That was good stuff.
Good,
She
yeah.
Some muted amens on my side.
Right. And I was telling the audience that Dr. Coleman touched on redlining, and I said, you know, that's going to be a theme that we hear throughout the day, especially as we go into housing. So, you know, that not to be shocked if they see it come up again in the presentation. So
For sure. Yeah, we're gonna dig in. So I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to just tell the audience a little bit about you, and then I am going to fade into Black. So,
Okay.
So everyone meet Mr. Eeny Meeny Ekong. Ekong serves as the principal for No Grade Consulting and is a skilled communicator with an almost 15-year history of training, facilitation, instruction, and consensus building, with years of experience working with our nation's most well-respected civil rights institutions. Eeny Meeny has a multifaceted body of experience, guiding dialogue around issues of race, religion, gender, and equity. Without further ado, Mr. Eeny Meeny Ekong.
Okay, and I am going to begin to share my screen. Okay, just got abled. Okay, so share. Okay. There we go. So I'm gonna go here. And we're gonna go. And I'm just gonna move my bar here real quick, and then we will dive in. Come on, bar. There we go. All right, well, happy Saturday, you all. As Sabria has shared, my name is Enamini Ekong. For inquiring minds, the name hails from Nigeria, and Enamini means God sees everything, and that he did. I didn't get away with much growing up, and so I'm elated to be a part of this programming. Hats off to Sabrina, the commission, just for producing meaningful dialogue in and throughout the state of Maryland. As she shared, I am the principal of No Grade Consulting, where our goal is to help constituents, organizations, affinity groups, you name it, make Black and white out of all the gray that's going on in the world, whether that's training, facilitation, mediation, you name it. And so for today, the goal of my program is for us to kind of clarify what we've traditionally understood to be the system of housing. I do want to preface my presentation by sharing we all handle clarity very differently. And with my goal being clarity on the issue of housing, for some of us, clarity brings about relief. For some of us, clarity takes away a level of innocence that can sometimes cause our emotions to ambush us. So I would like to preface that, because as I throw out details and stats and go through this presentation, I just want to caution you that whatever might come up, I hope you pepper the chat with questions, even your thoughts and feelings on details that you learn, so that at the end of this presentation we can have a meaningful dialogue. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. I want to kind of set the framework that whenever we use system or systemic, I want to talk about kind of some of the attributes of systems that we don't always readily identify. So we know that, a system is anything made up of different parts, right? And when you're thinking about it mechanically and otherwise, you understand that. But it's also real key for us to understand that systems don't feel, they function. This is going to become important later on as we kind of think through the system of housing. But, a system is designed to do intentionally what it was designed to do. It's amoral. And by that, it doesn't have a moral compass. It doesn't see the right and wrong of how it was designed. It just functions. Okay. It depends on all of its parts. And so when you think about a system, if the ignition in your car doesn't work, then the car doesn't drive. So in order for the car to drive, the ignition has to work. It depends on that. And then I just want to underscore, most, if not all, systems are intentionally engineered. Intentionally engineered. So when we think of systems, we have our solar system, we have our ecosystem, as you all well know. If you've been living anywhere consistently for the last 10 or 15 years, you've probably noticed that you can't always anticipate what winter, spring, fall, what all that looks like. It seems like autumn is bleeding into summer, summer is bleeding into winter, winter is bleeding into spring. And so we're finding that even though our ecosystem is what is, it functions, there are variables within the system that it depends on. And as you can see on this wheel to the right, when you think about the ecosystem, it needs, the function and dependency of water and land and soil. It also needs the strong economy. It functions around human beings. And so how that plays into the overall ecosystem affects how our climate changes. Think about school systems, the legal system. Why certain things come about and are so difficult to break is because the variables enable those systems to function. Financial system, digestive system, and what's been so amazing as we've gone through this pandemic is many of us have become more medically informed than we ever desired to. Understanding about the respiratory system and how COVID-19 attacks the immune system and how it can take from a common cold and exacerbate it in another way. All that to say, systems are a key role in everything that we do in our everyday life. So in thinking about this presentation and how to really adequately present the system of housing, I was trying to think of what era to start in just to give us proper context. And I couldn't help but to start at the early part of the 20th century. So in the early 1900s, we see a lot in housing, but the most quintessential era of housing really occurred right after World War II. Now, to give you some more historical context, and to kind of put you into the early 1930s, 1920s, before we ever go into World War II, we've just come out of what is called the Great Depression. And during this time, it would have been almost replicated to some of our recessions, that there was unforeseen economic challenge across gender, across race. Poverty does not discriminate. We all understand that, we all know that. But in this case, what was very, very interesting, and I point this out because it goes to show how racially contextualized we were at the very early outsets of our history. And I wish I could go back to slavery and kind of walk us through, because we would see trends of how, what has made us fundamentally American, and how systems have been created, even preceding the era that I've identified. But we're going through the Great Depression, and even during this Great Depression, there were these things called breadlines, where if you didn't have money and you needed food to eat, there would be these breadlines where free bread and maybe water, maybe milk would be delved out. But even during the Great Depression, there were segregated breadlines. This is key to know, because as you think about it, we're all suffering, we're all in poverty, but even yet and still, there is a somewhat of a hierarchy as we suffer. Then shortly after that, we get bombed at Pearl Harbor, and there's this coalescing of, similar to 9/11, for those who wouldn't be able to kind of get the the sentiments of what took us into World War II, but there's an attack, and we as a country link arms, unify, and we go into World War II. During World War II, for African Americans, there would have been a campaign that was led called the Double V campaign. So if you think about two V's, we wanted the victory overseas, but we also wanted the victory at home. And that was over racial segregation, the early essence of Jim Crow. And during this time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also known as President FDR, he's seeing how the country is hurting, and he decides to create a new deal with the American people, that we will lift ourselves up by our bootstraps, that the government will reach out and show how much it cares. And this new deal would proliferate everything that we know in public programs. So it has your public works, your financial reform, so its own version of a stimulus bill. And amid this, there is this onset of a housing boom. And the government sets up the FHA, the Federal Housing Authority. And it's during this time that they begin to establish, after we win World War II, they begin to establish and hand out GI bills to ensure that our veterans coming back get adequate housing and are rewarded for the victory that they got overseas. What's very interesting is that the government starts to set up a national neighborhood appraisal system. explicitly tying mortgages to the eligibility of race. And it becomes a precarious pursuit into what we know of housing. There was a practice called redlining. And I just want to point out, because Sabria was so grammatically sound to reach out to me and say, hey, I think you misspelled redlining. And it's funny, I've done this presentation in other ventures, and I get that a lot. And so I appreciate my grammatically sound folks. I do want to let you all know, just in case you're looking at the slide and thinking that it's not spelled right. Historically, this is how redlining would have been seen, so that if you were to do a search on it, this is generally what comes up. But redlining would have been the practice of trying to ensure that good neighborhoods remain good neighborhoods, and that neighborhoods weren't intermingled. I'm going to just do a quick walkthrough of the observation, or the picture that you're seeing to the right. So there was kind of a scale of colors, and those of you who know your history know that the colors represented fiscal or financial stability. And so in the green areas, you would see that those areas were codified for the houses that had the most value, the areas that were the nicest. And whenever you were buying a house, you would seek out those green areas because they had a higher rating. And during FDR's New Deal and the standing up of the Federal Housing Administration, loans before World War II, you would have to put 50% down in order to afford a house. And if any of you are thinking about, man, if you have a $100,000 house and you have to come up with $50,000, it made housing such an unreachable goal. Well, after World War II and the GI Bill and the establishment of the FHA, they bring it down to what we now know as kind of the conventional loan rates, where you could put down 20% and own a home. So these areas were associated with good rates. And so in order for you to get into a green area, you got real great percentage rates, but it also made it much more affordable for you to own a home. The underwriters of these loans would share that the color impacted value. So the green had high value. It's likely that a house, a house in the red area that would be 100,000, that very exact same house in the green area would be 300,000. The yellow area would have been, hey, you're kind of adjacent to an area that could start to bleed into the value of your home. And so on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about how that was impacted. What's very key during this period is that in between the 1930s and the early 1960s, the federal government backed $120 billion of home loans. Out of those, 98% went to that of whites. Just kind of want that to settle in. The idea that out of $120 billion that was given out in loans, only 2% makes up anyone outside of a white identification. That would have included African Americans, Latinos, anything else. So the BIPOC community. When you go further into redlining, you start examining how cities and towns are constructed, and you'll find that even where minority communities started to thrive, you would find that those neighborhoods would find that highways would be constructed very uniquely, and some would argue intentionally, through some neighborhoods. If you were to ask the Highway Administration, they would have suggested that there were certain thoroughfares that made it more efficient, easier to get to certain locations. But if you go to any major city in the United States right now, I mean, if any of you are fans of a rapper by the name of Eminem, he talks about the 8 Mile. The 8 Mile is kind of a highway that splits a community in Little Rock, in Dallas, in any major city, you'll see that major highways historically have segregated communities. Outside of redlining, you would have two other practices that would come out of this particular era. A practice called blockbusting and then urban renewal. So blockbusting was if you lived in one of those yellow areas, what would have happened is realtors were incentivized to blockbust because you could make a lot of money. You would go to a white family and say, hey, you know, you're kind of adjacent or butted up against an area that's decreasing in value. I know your house costs you $120,000. I'll buy it off of you for $100,000 cash if you move out, and I can get you into one of those green areas. And these white communities would buy into the narrative, find their ways to further out in suburbia, and then decide, I want to gain more value. I want to be in a neighborhood that's safe and more lucrative. And then that same realtor would turn around and ask a Black family, hey, would you be interested in this home? It's currently selling for $150,000. And so if you wanted it, I'd be happy to be the one to sell it to you. And so these realtors would hand over fist be able to take a home, almost kind of manufacture white flight, and then resell those homes to make a $50,000 profit, or upwards of $100,000 as they busted up the block. Urban renewal would have been responsible for, the idea was that they would make cities more livable. And this was important because as redlining was going on, African Americans and minorities at large were being codified into centralized areas in the city. And so the government decided, hey, one of the ways that we'll try and make things more livable is we'll start this thing called urban renewal, where we'll knock down buildings and make them more innovative. We'll give you more amenities. Unfortunately, in the process of knocking things down, the housing administration destroyed 90% of inner city housing, 2/3 of that housing affecting communities of color, specifically African Americans and Latinos. And so what urban renewal ended up being is knocking down livable housing with the promise that more innovative housing would be designed, only to create what were historically called vertical ghettos, but what we know as the projects. And so from that, we see that this redlining, to make it more at home for those of us who are in the state of Maryland, I'm gonna use Baltimore as our kind of case study, but I will identify some other places throughout Maryland. What we know is that in the early 1900s, redlining happened in 239 cities throughout the United States, major cities at that. And there were things to be considered, because the idea here is that when you tie housing to value, what you're doing is, in a larger sense, you're constructing the American dream around a race. And if you look at the old images, the historical images of what the American dream looked like, some of the demographics and the depictions of the American dream wasn't the melting pot that we've often talked about in theory. And I apologize for historical context. Usually I clarify that the melting pot never included minorities. It included individuals of a different ethnic background, but that by visual, if you were to deem them a race, they would have been considered white. That being said, theoretically, whenever we think about a melting pot, we think everyone being in one big gumbo. Unfortunately, that wasn't always the case. And so here in Baltimore, you see the red areas that you're looking at, for those of you who are familiar with Baltimore, that would have been East and West Baltimore. And so if you go to East and West Baltimore today, you would easily find the legacy of redlining. I want to take a step back, and then we'll dive further into the Maryland history. A lot of this was onset by a gentleman by the name of J.C. Nichols. If you ever get an opportunity to read about J.C. Nichols, he was a phenomenal individual. By far, he was called the father of city planning, and for good reason. He instilled in communities across the United States that developing communities around the idea of racial covenants would have been the innovative pursuit of value and good housing in perpetuity. He was a native of Kansas City. He was befriended by at least 3 presidents, namely Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so as you're thinking about the New Deal, he's good friends with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And as they're thinking about how to really help America get back on its feet after the Great Depression, after World War II, he became a key cog in the understanding of what housing looked like throughout the United States. He came up with this idea that the way to maintain stable property values was to segregate people. And you find that the idea around integrated neighborhoods was synonymous with financial risk. In part because the thought here was that if you intermixed communities, not only would they be socially unstable, but they would be financially unstable. A quote that came from a longtime resident who participated in blockbusting said, I didn't have, and mind you, this would have been in the early 1900s, so forgive me for the connotation of how this individual would have quoted, but he said, as a white male, he said, I don't have issues with Blacks. In fact, I like Blacks. The issue that I have is that whenever they move into my community, the value of my home goes down. And so even the well-meaning populations of individuals who had no racial bent towards minorities understood that where they lived and who lived by them impacted their financial interests. J.C. Nichols would continue to use a tool like deed restrictions and legal contracts to ensure that certain communities would forbid African Americans, Jews, and other minorities from being in those companies, being in those communities. And so the J.C. Nichols Company became both the first and highest profile organization to encourage these restrictive covenants. And as of the mid 1950s, given all the land that they bought up, they have assets valued in the excess of 500 million. Now, mind you, that was the mid 1900s, mid 1990s rather. And so as we are well into the 21st century, you can imagine what that same land value and those assets are now. And once again, there's a connection to wealth here. I wanted to give you a brief example of what one of these covenants would have looked like. And while I understand everyone is intellectually sound, just for the impact, I'm just going to read the one on the left. None of said lots or portions of lots should ever be sold, conveyed, transferred, devised, leased, or rented to or used, owned, or occupied by any person of Negro blood or any person who is more than 1/4 of Semitic race, blood, origin, or extraction, including, without limitation, in said designation, Armenians, Jews, Hebrews, Turks, Persians, Syrians, Arabians, including, however, from the application of this paragraph, partial occupancy by bona fide domestic servants employed thereon. In so many words, anybody who was not white could not be on this land unless you were serving as my domestic servant. So an African-American could be in your home as long as they were cooking, cleaning, taking care of your children, but at no point could they ever own your home. J.C. Nichols, the country club throughout the Kansas City would have, if you look it up, there's much more about J.C. Nichols that could be said. To kind of get to the heart of kind of going back to Baltimore, and then we'll talk a little bit more abroad about Maryland and other cities within Maryland. Here's where legacy matters. So in the early 1900s, Baltimoreans started housing ordinances, and this happened through homeowners associations, and they would, they started the segregation of Black Baltimoreans from whites. There was a gentleman by the name of Ashby Hawkins, who was a lawyer. He ended up buying a home in a white neighborhood. And the newspaper came out and said that there was a Negro invasion. And shortly thereafter, the policy known as the Ordinance of 610, named after Councilman Samuel West, came about the same year, which ensured that no Black resident could move on a block where there were more than half of residents that were white. And this, for what it was worth, also was to a benefit of Black communities, that if you had 50% of African-American community, someone of a white race could not move in and then ultimately take over the neighborhood. The 610 ordinance, no different than the Federal Housing Authority, was a government-sponsored housing segregation law. And many private communities started to take on this idea of these covenants. J.C. Nichols, like I said, impacted major cities. And I want to say almost single-handedly taught America how to create deeds and restrictive covenants to keep minorities out. This particular Roland Park Company deed agreement, I have, if you go to the Maryland Center of History and Culture, you can find out tons of great information. They've had plenty of presentations on the Roland Park Company as well. But they stated here that at no time shall the land in said tract or any part thereof, any building erected thereupon, be occupied by a person of Negro extraction. And this covenant was similar to the one that we just read, would allow for African-American domestics to be on the land, but not to own the land. Now, for the sake of this presentation and to kind of give you some mental gymnastics, for lack of a better word, I decided for this presentation just to look up the value of homes in the Roland Park community in Maryland today. And so the house right here in the middle is currently on sale. The one in the top right is currently on sale. And the one on the bottom right just sold, I want to say, in September. So when you think about the legacy of what this racial covenant would have ensured, any family who would have lived in this house, passed it to their children, their children's children, and they're prepared to sell, you sell this house and you can imagine what it can do for a legacy. I put here replication as a form of flattery because we find that, once again, if you're familiar with Maryland, University Park, where Maryland College Park is, Hyattsville, Mount Rainier, Colmar Manor, Cottage City, Capitol Heights, and Bladensburg, they all similarly had restrictive covenants that ensured that only a certain genre of individual could be in that community. So as I kind of come to the wrap up of this, because there's so much more history that I could dive into, the question that I kind of pose is, why is housing so important? And much of this we already know. There's the visual effect of what we understand about housing, and then there's the intangibles. The stable monthly payments, when you're renting, as the demand goes up, so does your rent. And so if you're living in a place, it's very easy for the affordable $1,000 a month that you came into the community with to hop up in 6 months to $1,500. And if you can't make the payments, move, because the demand is so high that I could replace you. The opportunity to build equity. The idea of living in a house is that you're living in your savings bank, that the equity that you're building in the house, be it 30,000, 50,000, you can sell your house and do something with that money. You can start a business, you name it. It's cheaper than renting over time. There's no equity in renting. Many argue that you're kind of throwing money down a black hole. And this is not to make light of anyone who is renting. We're all at our own stages and phases of life, but on its most bird's eye view, renting is just that. You're adding value to someone who's holding onto the property and actually gaining equity, right? This is why Airbnb has taken over the hotel market. Once again, another conversation. There's tax advantages. You actually get paid back by the government for owning a home. The economic leverage. Once again, you're able to take out equity from your house and fund your kids' college. You can start a business. Number of other things. You can retire and move to an international country. Studies have shown that housing is the #1 predictor of academic achievement. And so if you think of that, just the opportunity that equity and value in a home offers you as you think about your children, and you all have probably heard the phrase whenever people say that, it's not that they're leaving their neighborhoods because they don't like the people that they live around, but they say, I'm doing this because I want to give my kids a better opportunity. And so there's an opportunity cost whenever you think about what housing does. There's correlations to the quality of life. When you think about what was done to minority communities with urban renewal and with redlining, is that you'll find that there are correlations to quality of life that are impacted. Those same communities, they didn't have a 24-hour fitness gym. They didn't have country clubs. They didn't have amenities like the DMV or good health care. And so you'll find that there's a correlation to that where there's development and where there's quality housing, there's lower taxes. Clearly, whenever you have a booming housing market and people are doing well, it impacts the kind of the taxes and values that go into the schools, that go into infrastructure. People want to be in those areas. And so you have some of the top tier hospitals. And so if you look into your communities, you can see a reflection of, man, whenever I think about where's a good place to go to school, or a good doctor, or a specialist that I have to go to, how far do you have to drive in order to get good quality of life? Not to mention the mechanism to build credit, stability, and the like. As I come to a close, by 1965, we find that there's an about face by the government. They develop the housing of urban development, and this particular federal agency was designed to unravel and undo the systemic racism that had prevailed throughout the Federal Housing Authority. You'll see year after year that the government starts to walk back all of the damage that it had done. Mind you, by 1968, whenever the Federal Housing Administration makes an about face, historically, I just kind of want to put things in context as I come to a close, that Martin Luther King gets assassinated April 4th of 1968. Literally 7 days later, after clearly everything that's going on in the world, the government sees fit. It's kind of brought to a place of contrition about what's going on in the world and what they've done to communities and all of the uprisings, the sanitation workers in Memphis, and they about face on housing and say, hey, we got to correct this. Now, from 1930 to 1968 is a long time and a couple of generations for $120 billion to be invested into a community. And the government continues to make steps forward. More recently, and I say this very apolitically, I'm stating facts here. that our current governor, Larry Hogan Jr., Lawrence Hogan Jr., put forth House Bill, and my screen's kind of blocked, but you all see the House Bill that has begun to delete these unlawful ownership restrictions. So whatever your position on politics, the benefit of what this has done, and I would encourage everyone to actually go and read line by line what this has done. While it has no immediate impact, it does have a generational impact, because being able to unravel the wrong that has been done is a step in the right direction. That being said, we may not see the benefits of it for generations. I had this brief slide just to kind of, I took this back in July, and more so while we were still heavy in the crux of COVID-19. And I just wanted you to be able to look at the stats. If you look at the select characteristics, you'll see age, you'll see sex, and then you'll see race. And if you go over to the total, what it does is it shares with you the number of people, or at least in July, the number of people who were in a home, who were gainfully housed. And then it shows in the next column, owned and free and clear, those who actually own their home. And so you see the numbers, and I would just point out, which is just an observation by the naked eye, that there are more individuals who own a home who just happen to be of the white race than all the minorities collectively. When you see those who own their home free and clear, meaning that they're not paying a mortgage, that in some ways is more than those who are in a home, right, from the minority population. And then those who are currently caught up on their house, meaning that they're not negligent on their house payment, or they haven't lost their job and they're maintaining payments. You see once again just the impact and the legacy of housing. I know I'm short on time, and so I want to get to some form of dialogue, because I can only presume that a number of things have come up, and even if I needed to prime the pump, here are the two questions that I usually ask in such a presentation as we think about the system, the impact, and then some of you probably thinking about your communities, how the system of housing may have impacted in or where you live. So I'll rest there, Sabria, as I know we come to the close. You're on mute, but you're eloquent. I can see.
Oh, good. That's what mattered the most, is the eloquence. Thank you so much, Mr. E. Kong. And we do have some questions coming in, but I am going to be a little selfish and ask the first question myself, because I get to do that because I'm the moderator. And I think actually, as I look at the questions, that what I'm going to ask actually comes up again. And then I do see that there are some participants who are raising their hands. If you all could either ask your questions in the chat, or in the question, using the question and answer feature, or in the chat, that would be great. Because I don't think I have the ability to do anything else in terms of, take you off of mute or anything if we were in a meeting. But what I wanted to ask or speak to was, I know as I listened to the presentation, this idea, right, of being, that comes out a lot with Black people, of being house rich, right? Like that's what some people reference it as, where all of our wealth, all of our assets, anything that we can claim that's caught up in our homes. So when the market, which it tends to do, it goes up and goes down, and we tend to suffer the most, especially, of course, when and I say suffer when it goes down. And I noticed that always comes up during that time, like that idea of being house rich. And, our parents and generationally, it's been, as soon as you can, buy that home. And I notice now a lot of millennials, and I haven't jumped into it deeply, but I see a lot of younger people are putting out there, well, maybe that's not the way to go, and here's why. And of course, it tends to go back to finances. So can you speak to that at all?
For sure. And so housing is a tool, right? It is a one-trick pony to wealth. But what we find is that it is only as stable as the market, right? And many people during the recession figured this out. And so what you see is once the recession hit, people started rethinking housing. And so anybody who's an HGT fan, you know that the reason why tiny homes have become so popular is because people are no longer trying to buy into this idea that I want to be house rich. They want to be right now rich and have their house paid off. And so a tiny home is kind of affording people this more security than former generations of saying like, well, no, live in a house and get some value. People are saying, well, no, when I went underwater and I paid, $400,000 for a house, but I can only sell it for $200,000. I'll never do that again. I want to own my house outright. And then whatever I make, my take home is my take home. Right. But the challenge is that indicative, like geographically, we've learned that there is, geography has had a way of proliferating practices, be it Jim Crow, be it wealth. And so geographically, minority communities have traditionally suffered because whenever the market goes down, your community, in the eye of the beholder, may not necessarily be sought out to begin with, right? And so that the people who are purchasing your home 9 times out of 10 may look like you because they understand what amenities are in the area. Like if you go to places like, PG County has been nationally known for good reason, right? Because you can find good hair salons, you can find good food because it caters to a community. But there aren't a lot of individuals who are buying up those communities, although there's some change. I wouldn't call it urban renewal. We know it as gentrification. And so to more specifically to your question, we suffer because where you live geographically has everything to do with a desire that others have to live there. And the less people that can desire that area that have wealth, you suffer, right? The house that I just showed that was on the market in Roland Park, as long as there are wealthy people, they're always in the market for more property because they know what value long-term it offers. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for that. And so then I'll jump into some of the questions that we have in a question and answer. And some of them are very specific. So I just want you to keep that in mind when it comes to answering. So Laura Steele asked, are you familiar with the current plan to build a fast train from DC to Baltimore that would in present day do the same thing that urban renewal has done, breaking apart communities? If so, can you speak to that?
So I am recently transplanted back to the East Coast. I do know that when I left in 2013, half of what I see today was not even a thought. And so I know that, the thing about the East Coast is it's so transient. And by that, it's so easy to move around. There's everybody who wants to come and be on the side of power, because we're close to the Capitol. But yes, it is oftentimes that whenever there's development opportunities, you look at the greatest opportunity to buy people's houses out. And oftentimes those are communities of color. But no, I don't know the details of that. So I wouldn't be able to, with a clear conscience, speak to it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So next we have John Kerner, who says, given that home ownership is the most significant form of wealth building and explains the major difference between white and people of color's generational wealth, how can state and local governments develop reparation policies with significant investments that provide resources that repair the historical and ongoing damage done by federal, state, and local redlining? And I'll just say we are having a reparations program after lunch, but I see John wants to jump into it right now.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, one of the things, and Martin Luther King spoke to it about there being 4 non-ways to bring about nonviolent change. And one of the first ways that you bring about nonviolent change, and by that I mean not yelling at one another, but really dialoguing through the issues. The first cog in that 4-wheel approach is to fact find. Part of the reason why the word reparation causes anybody in state or federal government to bristle is because we haven't found out. I mean, while the facts are there, I think many who are just coming to the party after the summer of unrest, everything that has proliferated throughout our country, we're still in a fact-finding process of getting details and saying, okay, what do we do from here? So I wouldn't be as brash to say what the government should do, in part because we are the government. And so I think oftentimes we put the responsibility of what should happen to our communities in the hands of others, when in fact, I think we could do a really good job of creating our own reparations, community by community, of ensuring that our communities have what they need, and our state and local governments partnering with us, giving us grants and funding so that in essence, we're doing what we think is best for our communities rather than leaving it up to federal and state entities to tell us what we know that they don't already know, how to take care of our communities.
Yes, and I think that goes back to the social contract. I don't know if you had been on the call yet, but the social contract that Dr. Coleman was talking about. And I really like that idea of it has to start with us, and that, you know, that conversation again of reparations, it has to start with us. We have to come up with the terms, you know, because it will affect us most heavily. So I appreciate that. Yes, that is a good point. So Leonard Gore asks, Mr. Econ, thanks for your very informative and enlightening presentation. Hopefully all participants will be able to impart this knowledge for others in our community. What has been done in effectively demonstrating to white brothers and sisters that there is value in Black as applied to housing?
It's a good question, and I hope I'm understanding it right. But if the question gets at whether or not our white brothers and sisters have seen value in investing in Black communities, I would venture to say that yes, it is being done. But we know that unfortunately, good news doesn't always make the news waves, and so I think there are. So I mean, when we talk about historic preservation, there's a number of historic, like the National Trust for African American Preservation. There's a number of efforts, and I say that just because I know good people. Nina Simone's home is you know, being preserved. There's great history and great communities that are being invested in through federal dollars. But the challenge is that we don't always know about it. Is it on a you know, a massive scale to where we just see that the world's changing before our eyes? No, because I think much like the unwriting of covenants and deeds that I pointed out about what Governor Hogan Jr. is doing, it's not immediate, but it will be generational, that we'll see the effects, or rather our children and our children's children will see the effects of some of the slow momentum that's occurring.
Great. Where's the Nina Simone house at?
I think it's either it's in one of the down south communities. If I find more information, I'll share it. But I want to say Mississippi, Alabama for some reason.
Oh wow, great. Okay, and then we have a question from Eleni Ashane, who asks, real estate sector. It says real estate sector, and I don't know if that means real estate sector, is a crucial economic factor to disconnect the pieces of social dysfunction. How do we engage the younger generation to be an ambassador of a better living environment?
So this is good, and I wanted to, because Dr. Coleman touched on Brown v. Board, I was gonna touch on just a little piece of that. So one, I think whenever we talk about the upcoming generations, we know, and particularly if you're parents, you know, there's more caught than taught, right? And so it's not about what we can oftentimes teach our young people, it's what we're currently demonstrating. And so I think the challenge with the way we view the following generations is that if we tell them what's right, then they'll just do it. But the reality is if we're not actually modeling the kind of the trajectory that we want them to be on, that's part of the issue, right? So if you want our young people to be the ambassador, I think it once again, it starts with us saying, what am I going to do with my child or younger generations by my side, to show them this is what we need to do, either to, you know, renovate our community, to uplift our community, or to work with a community that we traditionally haven't worked with. And so I think we've always kind of said, what can we tell people to do? Who can we put our trust in? When, once again, I think history has shown part of the civil rights movement was because we weren't saying that we wanted to sit by white kids because there was something that would cause us to be immediately intellectual. If you talk to anybody who was raised in the civil rights era, they'll say, I appreciated my all Black school and my professors who gave me dignity and that knocked on my door and came and ate dinner with my family. Integration by a lot was not the answer. What we wanted through Brown versus Board of Education is we wanted access. We wanted the opportunity cost, so that the same books that were being offered up the street could be provided in my Black school where I could still get dignity. Not that I would go to another school, have access to those books, and in the process lose myself. And I'm not saying that to say that integration is the problem, but I would argue that many of the civil rights generation would say, yeah, no, we lost something when we integrated.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, this is good. We only have a couple more minutes, and I want to ask the last question. Charlotte asks, living in a multiracial community, how do you get minority owners involved with community, and what is the importance of this involvement? So
generally, if you have an HOA, you should be at some point, if not a member, you should hold an office, because most of the decisions about your community happen in those very small and intimate, yet very powerful four-walled rooms. If you don't have an HOA, your planning commission, wherever they're at, you need to be at those meetings, those town halls, and you'll get newsletters about what's going on in the community. If you ignore that, shame on you, because the taxes that you pay, the trash, whether or not there's pickup, the crime, whether or not your area is being patrolled, all of that has to do with the level of involvement that you have in the community. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not be detached from reality. The reason why some of us haven't participated in that is because we're too busy doing life, right? Like you working, you trying to take care of your kids, you got your grandkids over, you're trying to figure out your career thing. And so oftentimes these meetings that make wholesale changes to how you live are oftentimes because you're too busy living life. But once again, once you make it a priority and your kids see that, they'll start to see the significance of what it means to be in those rooms.
And that's great. And can I add to that? So as a former homeowner in Baltimore City, I lived in the Union Square community in Southwest Baltimore. I was heavily involved in our community association, and we were very adamant in calling it a community association rather than an homeowner association, because we knew in our neighborhood, in our community, we had a mixed community, right? We had some people who were homeowners, and we had some people who were renters. We had some people who their housing situation was unstable, and we never wanted to ostracize anyone. And we wanted to keep in mind that those folks who were currently renting, may have been potential homeowners and investors in our neighborhood. So there was a lot for us in language. And I thought that, and so whenever I go around and I look and I see, the different communities, I'm really conscious about how they speak because if I'm calling it a homeowners association meeting and you're not a homeowner, are you going to come? So the divide is already being placed there. So I think that when we talk about how we get those involved in our communities, we have to really think about community and think about, how we want to involve those in our community. So I just wanted to piggyback off of that with you.
If I could just piggyback on that real quick. And I was going to say that's so important. I appreciate wholeheartedly you bringing that up because oftentimes the difference between someone being able to buy a home is knowledge, right? And being in the presence of others, if I don't know who you all look up to, but if you ever had the opportunity to be around someone who was where you wanted to be, you would soak that up. And I think far too often we miss that opportunity because that is the hand up, is that in what other context can we help renters understand the value of home buying? And what other context can we actually know what's going on with renters to advocate for them, whether it's helping them with the playground, or if you're in a profession that could actually aid those who are in those communities. If you're an accountant, a doctor, a lawyer, that you could provide services to keep them from being mishandled by the things that they believe that are currently available for them. So excellent point. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we did have a lot of engagement in the chat around this topic. So I want you to know, Mr. Ekong, that what you're talking about is some good stuff. So I thank everyone who has been active. Someone did ask really quickly before we go, has redlining been eliminated in Maryland?
By policy, yes, not necessarily by practice. And once again, because geographically, practices can proliferate on the basis of what geography does, right? Like there are some areas that you all say for instance, I remember when I was back here in 2013, Rockville and Bethesda were the areas that you wanted to live because they had tons of amenities and beautiful houses. Coming back, they still do, and some, right? But the reality is the price point is so unreachable for so many that it is something that you can drive by and see in awe, but not always, really be able to participate in. But once again, I think there is hope. I have, because at the point by which we desire to say that we can change our own community and make it the community in awe, I think the game will be changed. I really do.
Right. Well, I think that's an excellent point to end on, keeping the hope alive, and we're going to keep pushing on. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Ekong. I actually met Mr. Ekong at an conference for the Association for African American Museums. So, during this virtual time and being able to attend these forums and conferences on behalf of the Banneker-Douglass Museum has just been able to connect me with some really powerful people. So this has been great. The audience is really thankful for you and your presentation as well. And I want you to enjoy the rest of your Saturday. And I want folks to know that we are going to take a lunch break, a virtual lunch break right now. So everyone can run and grab something to eat. Let us know what you eat when you get back. Let us know in the chat. And we will at 1:15 be ready to go on gonna wrap this up with some talk about reparations with the powerful Dr. David Fakunle. So I will see you all then. Thank you, Mr. Ekong, and thank you, Dr. Coleman. See you all soon.
Thank you. Y'all have a great weekend.
You too.